known as indirect legislation. It is also known as indirect legislation. So why are we saying it is indirect legislation? It is indirect because this is basically where now Parliament has given mandate to other bodies to be able to make laws on their behalf. So Parliament won't actually be there always to be able to make laws on our behalf as citizens of the country. So they don't have actually enough time to make laws for each and every person. So they'll simply be able to delegate or give that particular mandate to other bodies, or basically authorized bodies, to be able to make those particular laws on behalf of Parliament. So when they give that mandate, you know what we mean by to delegate. It's to give someone your responsibility to be able to carry it on your behalf. So Parliament might not actually be having all the time to make laws for each and every person, each and every body within the country. So through those acts of Parliament, you've said, they basically come up within Parliament, or those words they come up with Parliament, known as acts of Parliament. They can be able to delegate or give mandates to other bodies to be able to make laws to govern themselves. So in this case, we can be able to quote several examples. So you can be able to say, for example, something like maybe a SACCO. So a SACCO will come up with its own bylaws that will govern how the members of that particular SACCO will actually be able to associate as members of the SACCO. So those laws are basically governing the conduct of people associated with that particular SACCO as members. So Parliament is not the one that is making laws for that particular SACCO, but of course, they have given the mandate to that particular SACCO through an act of Parliament known as maybe SACCOs Act, through the SACCOs Act. So they have been given mandate. All SACCOs should actually be able to come up with bylaws before they're actually basically registered as a SACCO. So Parliament won't go to each and every SACCO to make their own laws on how they're supposed to associate. For example, in terms of how much membership fee should actually be paid, or how much shareholding or share capital should actually be paid by a member of that particular SACCO. So that's basically will be decided upon by members of that particular SACCO by coming up with their own bylaws. As to how much will be contributed, for example, in terms of maybe monthly subscriptions, will be determined upon by the members of that SACCO. So Parliament won't come there to make such laws for the SACCO. So they have already given the mandate. For example, in the SACCOs Act, they have delegated that mandate to SACCOs to come up with their own laws. So those laws will basically govern the conduct of members of that particular SACCO. So they'll be recognized as a source of law. So you can see where the delegation comes from. It comes from Parliament through the SACCOs Act. So Parliament basically legislated the SACCOs Act, and in the SACCOs Act, they have actually been able to give that mandate to each and every SACCO to be able to come up with their own bylaws, Another example that we can actually be able to give to come home, in this case, if you are a member of, let's say, for example, a chama, so Parliament won't come to your chama to start making laws for your chama. Your chama will actually come up with its own laws to govern how you'll associate as members of that particular chama. So you as a chama, where do you get the mandate? You get the mandate from the Societies Act, such that before you register a chama, you're supposed to basically deposit with the register of chamas the laws, or basically the rules that will actually govern your affairs as members of the chama. So Parliament would come to your chama to start making laws for you. That particular mandate has been delegated to you by the Societies Act. So before you register your chama, they'll call upon you to be able to provide the laws or the bylaws that will govern you as members of that particular chama. So you can see that where the delegation is coming from. It is coming from the Societies Act, which was a law that was actually passed in Parliament through legislation, and it gave the mandate to members of a chama to come up with their own bylaws before they basically register as a chama. So they have delegated the mandate to other bodies. Major reason being, Parliament won't have enough time to make laws for each and every person, or each and every association, or each and every body within the country. So that's why they can actually end up being able to delegate. So that's what we mean by delegated legislation. So we are saying sometimes it is known as indirect. So you can see Parliament is actually legislating, but is actually indirect because it is indirectly giving the mandate to another body. For example, the societies act indirectly to the members of the chairman to be able to come up with their own laws. So that's why you are saying now legislation itself through parliament will be termed as being direct. It is direct because it is being directly made in parliament. But in this case now, it is indirectly making laws through other bodies, through making laws through other bodies. So you can just actually be able to mention and say, so you can just actually be able to mention and say, it is made up, you can just say it is made up. It is made up of rules and regulations. It is made up of rules and regulations made by subordinates, subordinates, competent bodies, e.g., you can give an example, e.g., of those particular bodies. You can talk about, let's say, for example, local authorities, professional bodies, in brackets, you can say, for example, ISPAC, professional bodies like ISPAC, they'll come up with their own rules and regulations governing members of that particular professional bodies, statutory boards, etc. Statutory boards, etc. So those are examples of bodies that can actually be able to come up with their own laws. For example, in this case, when you talk about ISPAC, it gets that particular mandate from the Accountants Act. So the Accountants Act was actually basically legislated and actually approved in Parliament. So it gave the mandate to the ISPAC as a body to come up with their own laws governing the members of that particular body known as ISPAC. So we can just mention the key characteristics. So the key characteristics of delegated legislation are key characteristics of delegated legislation. So you can mention number one, there. It is made under the express authority of Parliament. It is made under the express authority of Parliament. The express authority, it gets the authority, express authority of Parliament. It is made under the express authority of Parliament, and we've seen how the authority comes in, for example, through an act of Parliament. So a particular body will get the mandate to be able to come up with their own laws, It can be published. You can say it can be published. It can be published. It can be published in the Kenya Gazette, before coming into effect or force. It can be published in the Kenya Gazette before coming into effect or force. Before coming into effect or force. So that's what we mean by delegated legislation. So why is it important to have delegated legislation? So you've given number one reason is that Parliament is not actually always in session. So it tries to save time for Parliament because it won't actually be able to make all the laws. Then also you find that in Parliament, it is not actually always composed with experts in all the fields. So the Parliament, if it doesn't have the expertise, it has to delegate the mandate to the experts who basically understand how to come up with such laws. So sometimes Parliament might lack expertise of how they can actually be able to come up with certain laws. So they can delegate or give out the mandate to other bodies, to give out mandate to other bodies. Then parliamentary lawmaking process it is sometimes a bit slow because we saw that we can have first reading, second reading, committee stage. It comes for third reading, then it is voted for. Then it is now actually assented to by the president. Maybe it may be sent to the president. It is sent back to Parliament. So parliamentary lawmaking process is actually a bit slow. And of course, in this case, they have to look for alternatives. So the alternative is basically to delegate some of the lawmaking process. So you find that sometimes it might not actually be responsive. Parliamentary lawmaking process might not actually be responsive to urgent needs. So if there are any urgent needs, basically they have to ensure they have delegated the mandate to other bodies that can actually be able to come up with laws that are actually urgently in need. So you can just basically look at the reasons as to why delegated legislation is actually it is needed. So why delegated legislation? Why delegated legislation? Why do they delegate this particular mandate to other bodies? So why delegated legislation? Why do we have delegated legislation? Why delegated legislation? Why delegated legislation? So we are saying, number one, Parliament is not always in